expert who is here, and he's going to tell you the various programs that we're on, the media outlets, and how to participate and keep up with us.
Well, good evening, everyone. This excited to be here with you on this evening. We are on several platforms, our GOD Radio app site, as well as we are on um, our website. We're on Facebook, both on GOD, Voice and Viewpoint. We're on LinkedIn. We're on Instagram, and we're also on IG. Take it away, Dr. Warren.
Well, this evening is an which is a very key element on the ballot.
Well, Dr. Warren, again, we must educate ourselves during this time so that we can be ready to vote wisely. So let's get down to it and let's get right into the prop.
Well, what we have happening this time is we have 14 propositions on the ballot. The California Democratic Executive Committee, on behalf of the Democratic Party in the state, has endorsed 8 of the 14, 6 they rejected. But the one proposition that's getting the most attention right now is Proposition 39. And Proposition 39 is so important because it was introduced by Carl DeMaio, who is a assembly representative from the San Diego area, and it mirrors the President Trump's Safe Voting Act, which would bring all kinds of restrictions on who can vote, excuse me, and how they can vote. And the whole idea is to reduce voter participation. If we reduce voter participation, if we can remove drop boxes, if we can have the post office not stamp in a timely manner ballots that are mailed in, if we can put troops at the polling sites and have people afraid to come vote, then we reduce the number of people voting. And if we can go the extra step here of requiring additional ID, then it can be even more important. So what happened in California is an ultra conservative group like DeMaio and his friends got together and they uh, gathered signatures and they put a proposition up 39 and they entitled it establishing additional voter identification and citizenship verification requirements as an initiative, a constitutional amendment, that is to the California state constitution. And they said that this proposition would do three things. Voters would be required to present government issue identification at the polls or the last four digits of a government issued identification number when voting by mail. The second thing was that the state provide voter identification cards on request. And the third, election officials annually report percentage of each county's voters whose citizenship they have verified. And so this is a way to really take a strong look at who is voting to discourage people who should not be voting, according to some of us. And it has often been the contention that in California, we have, as in other states, we have people who are non citizens voting. And one of the reasons they hop on California is because we have a system that allows you to register to vote when you are getting a driver's license or renewing it, or when you're getting a state issue identification card. And so they got the signatures, they put this matter on the ballot, and it was immediately challenged by our Attorney General, Rob Bonner. And Bonta challenged it based on the name that they put on it, okay? And so he changed the name. He changed the name to entitled Prohibits Citizens from Voting Unless They Present Government Issues Identification. That's different from the language that the proponents of Prop 39 used, which was to establish additional voter identification and citizenship verification requirements. And so this is very important that we're taking this up as one of the early issues, because as money is put out there, and we've already seen what happened with the Voting Rights Act being gutted by the Supreme Court, on the part of the proponents, they're hoping that when they see something that talks about strengthening requirements, that people will go ahead and vote for this and consider it all right. The reality is nothing could be further from the truth. And so, fortunately, the judge in California changed the title, and he called the ballot description that Bonner gave to this legislation as legal and accurate. And of course, that really frustrated the Carl DeMaios and the people who put the language further. Supporting Bonner was our own Secretary of State, Dr. Shirley Weber, okay, and she asked the court to compel state officials to correct the title before ballots or voter information guides are printed. And so that led to the courts taking immediate action, and they got it done. And now that which is going to be printed is going to make some sense, and is going to be another step closer to not just having people just go ahead and just sign something anyhow. So let's look at a couple of things here. Um, you can use your passport if you like uh, to vote. Okay. But part of the reality of this is that not everybody has a passport, and not all of our people uh, have their birth certificates handy. Not all of our people are able to go to uh, motor vehicles or to the Department of DMV or to the state and request this ID card that they want you to have, which requires you to present um, citizenship, birth, if you were naturalized, where you came from, what your papers were. They gave you the right to vote as a nationalized citizen. So all of these things get to be extremely important. Now, why is this so important in California? It's important here because the measures that this group have put forward bring to our state constitution the very issues that President Trump, under his Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, the very things under that act that would be a constitutional amendment for our country, they're trying to bring it to state constitutions and do a backdoor approach to get this stuff enacted. They say that the goal is to make sure only citizens vote in federal elections. But yet we've seen very little fraudulent voting throughout the country, if you will. And remember, we still have people swearing that former President Biden didn't win the election, former Vice President Harris didn't, and that everything was rigged. And yet we got the president on record asking the state of Georgia to find him 1,170 some votes so that he can influence the electoral college there. And so I'm going over this stuff because for some of you, you say, well, I don't really care about all of that. It's not that important. But your mailbox is going to be flooded in the days ahead. And you're going to see some really pretty slick, glossy things talking about you need to vote and suggesting that everybody who is not registered is illegal. And all of this stuff is extremely harmful to women because the women in the state, if you married one or a couple of times and your last name has changed, then that's going to be different than what's on your birth certificate. And not everybody has a birth certificate handy. And those who do have one, or you go to get these documents, they cost a lot of money. It costs money to get, approximately $165 to get a passport. It costs a minimum about $50 to get a copy of birth certificate validated with the stamp to show that it's official. And so all of these things are happening, and we have at least 6 other propositions separate and apart from this one that we want to look at. I want to just tell you a few things about the Save America Act, okay, and what it's trying to do. We saw what happened in Minnesota. We see that over 11 people have been murdered so far by ICE. We see that people are being picked up and rights violated, and accusations are being made that non-citizen voting is actually a problem when there is nothing to prove that that's the case, okay? And then I want to say a word specifically about the documents uh, you would actually be expected to get, okay? A standard driver license alone does not qualify in most states. It won't be sufficient. A real ID alone will not qualify. So you notice when we were pushing for the real ID here, you could take 2 pieces of mail with your address uh, to DMV, and you didn't have to go through a lot to get a document, okay? A military ID alone does not qualify. So here you can qualify and take the oath of office, and you can die for this country. But if you go to vote, you're going to be in a whole different ball game because it doesn't want to allow you to vote. Okay. And so there are only 5 states currently that issued a kind of enhanced driver's license that would qualify to help people. Of course, when all of this meets you, if this was enacted in terms of this proposition, people would be turned away by the large numbers. And that in itself would play into the hands of those who further want to kill democracy, uh, give us an authoritarian form of government with just a few people in control and having that minority element which supports the president. They call it MAGA. I call it MAGWA. Uh, they say make America great again. I say make America white again. And so that's part of the struggle that's going on. And so as I begin to talk about these things, I want to open it up if you have a question or a comment. I don't want to overwhelm you, the listener, with this. Even if you just question, well, why do I have to be bothered with that? Because November is not here and I'm enjoying the summer and I'm at the beach and all of these things. We need discussion because discussion leads to enlightenment and it helps us help each other understand what's really at stake and what we really have to do. So, Dr. Thomas, that's where I'm opening it, and I'm going to take us into a couple of more things as we move. But I want to pause because I don't want to be like just overwhelming us with information.
Well, Dr. Warren, I definitely don't think that it's an overwhelming thing. This is important information that we need right now. So you're saying that the real ID is not going to work in most cases?
Not by itself, no.
Okay.
They'll want the real ID plus the birth certificate and whatever other documents. Once this is enacted, they can come up with all the documents that they want. Mm-hmm. And to show you what a throwback this is, it wasn't until 1964 that we had the 24th Amendment to the Constitution, which outlawed modern poll tax. And so we got people living today that weren't alive then and don't understand that from the beginning of this country up until that point, mm-hmm. when people went to vote, you had to pay a tax, and the tax was designed to ensure that only the landed people, the people who own property, were able to vote. Mm-hmm. And so if you didn't own property, you and I, as Black folks coming out of slavery, we wouldn't have been able to do that. And let us not forget what we just got to right along about that time a few years early for women to vote.
Mm-hmm. Question has come up. How will this affect those who are registered to vote? Are you saying we need to have more than one ID to vote?
Well, here's the interesting part. And they could go back and require you to get an additional ID. Even though you already are registered, they could question and say, well, I see you registered, but I don't believe this is officially you. And they could go back and make all kinds of additional demands. And of course, this is not the days of the 50s or the 60s when we went through all of that and stood in line and waited. Yes, I must happily say that people, especially since the George Floyd scenario, people have stood in long lines in multiple states to vote. People have turned out by the millions for the No King's Day demonstration. And if those same people turn out to vote the same way they've done for the protests, and we're seeing numbers that we have not seen before in terms of the number of people actually waiting to vote.
So, Dr. Warren, how much do you think that ICE, in the presence of ICE, are going to have actual legal voters stay away from the polls for not wanting to be harassed?
Well, you want to remember two things about ICE. The president was able to get over $240 billion in funding for ICE. Now, ICE is not just immigration custom enforcement. It's Homeland Security, it's Secret Service, it's all of these other elements that are being brought, TSA, that are being brought to bear under the lie that we have increased terrorists among us, that people who don't look like those that they are letting in the country shouldn't be here. We saw them eliminate the temporary protective status for over 300,000 Haitians. At the same time, we saw them let people from Ukraine in ahead of the Haitians at the border. And then we see Elon Musk's brothers and sisters from South Africa being given special preferential treatment to come into the country because, of course, they're white. And so there is this effort underway to add to the number of white folks in America. And it's not racist to make that statement. They are threatened and intimidated. They've seen the statistical factors suggesting the browning of America is underway. The white population is diminishing and it's being integrated and mixed. They call it being diluted. And so there's great fear. And so fear is the factor that's being used to slide in this authoritarian elimination of our rights.
Yeah, and it seems to be what they would say so un-American to literally send people back to a country that is devastated by earthquake and coups and gangs and things of that nature, and it's an unsafe place. And people that were seeking asylum here for multiple years patiently were had people moved in front of them, although they were here first. I think that we have to realize that the fairness of immigration, the fairness of becoming a citizen is not fair. And our current president has says basically you could buy your way into America if you have enough money.
Well, and what he's doing with that is modeling it after some other countries. Like in Vancouver, people are able to come to Vancouver from other countries if they are business people and they bring monies with them and show that they have the ability to engage in starting or contributing to business. They can almost purchase citizenship. And you can't do that here. We got specific requirements under the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution governing citizenship. And so this is important. Um, and so, under the Save America Act that Trump's got, we already saw that it would have a phenomenal negative impact on people in rural America. Now, it's not just white folks that live in the country, but there are a lot of people of color. We got farmers, we got people who live. And here's one of the statistics that came. I found out that in the 30 largest counties by area in the Western United States, voters would need to drive an average of 260 miles to reach an election office. Okay. And one of the analysts found that they would be facing a 4 to 5 hour round trip on an average just to vote. Now, we saw that 4 years ago in Michigan, where a lady drove all kinds of distance like this to vote because they closed the polls, they reduced the number of polling places available. And when you do that, then you have to go further to use the existing ones. And all of that is a subtle effort of reducing citizen participation in terms of the election process.
Well, Dr. Warren, it seems like they think that if they take it out of the convenience area, that the people, most people that are on the borderline of voting won't vote because voting becomes very inconvenient. But just to get voters' rights, lots of people were inconvenienced. So I think that the biggest push now is no matter how far it goes, no matter how inconvenient it is, we must vote and be a part of this process.
Well, Dr. Thompson, in the last presidential election, I'll never forget in the state of Georgia, because the Republican conservatives control the state and they had taken over the election process. They passed local ordinances that made it a misdemeanor to give water to people waiting in the line to vote or to give food to people waiting in line to vote. And before that kind of madness happened, you could see people in different places in the country bring their folding chairs and a book or umbrella and sit and read and wait for the line to move. Okay. And so then we noticed that the time was changing or they didn't have enough ballots and they had to sent to get ballots from someplace else, and people had to uh, uh, they had to extend the polls in terms of the closing time. If the closing time was 8 o'clock, sometimes they couldn't close at 10 because there were so many people in line. And by law, once you're in line, you have to be allowed to vote. And so those are the things that were on the table. And I believe that with what we're seeing in terms of this war that we didn't ask for, the shortages that we have, the kinds of decisions, the graft and the corruptions, we're seeing more lies from Elon Musk's Dole's program that people are beginning to understand that the only way they're going to really get change is to vote. And once the masses decide that that's the case, they're going to stand in line to vote. And we're seeing increased Democratic victories. But at the same time, we're seeing problems within the Democratic Party itself as it splinters, and this younger element calling themselves um, progressive are impatient with some of the older changes. Now, the Republicans and the president and all of his men are trying to make it look like that all the Democrats are socialists. And if they're socialists, that's akin to being communists. And if they're communists, then that's not what we want to have and we don't need. But I was thinking about this, Dr. Thompson, on my way over here. I remember when the Congress passed Medicare. And I remember when Medicare was being debated, because I was on the staff at that time. This is over 50 years ago. Some members of Congress on the Republican side did not want to pass Medicare because along with Medicare came the requirement that they provide Social Security and tax benefits to their domestic help. And a lot of these members of Congress were talking to each other in these closed sessions. I was in as a staff member. They were talking about how their wives didn't want to pay the help. They didn't want the housekeeper, the maid, and all those people to be getting Social Security and any benefits. But now let's fast forward to the day. Today, what I see is that if we didn't have Social Security, which goes hand in hand with Medicare, it would be a lot of us in great trouble. And so Social Security might have been called socialism, but Social Security has rescued so many lives. And when you look at what happens when you turn 65, I didn't understand it back then when I was about 20 something, and we were talking about how we were going to structure Medicare. I didn't understand that meant that at the point that you turn 65, you automatically had to go into Medicare. You were no longer under regular private insurance. And then it was parts A or B, and then later came the ability to do supplements to it so that so many of us have supplemental care. In California, for instance, where we have Medicare, where we have Medicaid and Medicare.
Yeah.
Medicare is the supplemental companion to Social Security, and in some places it's Medicaid, where that helps. Medi-Cal, that's what I'm trying to think. Medi-Cal is the supplement to Medicare.
Yes.
Okay, and so what Medicare doesn't cover, if you have qualified and you have Medi-Cal, then Medi-Cal covers it. And in so many instances in California, until this madness with Trump, Medi-Cal had reached a point that it even offered greater benefits sometimes than Medicare, because you had behavior coverage and all kinds of treatment and therapy and sessions that weren't covered. All these things, if you're talking about socialism, then I guess there are a lot of us are happy that we have a degree of socialism, because a lot of us without Social Security, without Medi-Cal and Medicare and the supplements, we wouldn't be able to get health care even now.
Mhm.
And even though they can't stop that directly, they're closing, forcing hospitals to close,
Mhm.
forcing you to go further. Hospitals now have people in hallways on stretchers and gurneys because they don't have the staffing and they don't have the facilities for them. And so we need to be mindful of these things right now as we're preparing to vote in the next 8 to 9 weeks. A matter of fact, voting starts on October 5th. That's when they mail the ballots out. And we need to become mindful and not wait until we are the subject of the crisis, as so many of us do. And then we want everybody to come to our rescue when all we had to do was exercise our right to vote and we could have made a difference in the outcome.
Well, Dr. Warren, as we talked about Prop 39, and there are other propositions that we're going to go over. Can we talk about what I say the rest of the story? Because sometimes we see the big picture of the props or the bills, but we don't see that fine print of things that are added on that are not the big picture, but the small picture, but have a big impact.
Well, that's a part of where I was trying to go when I was telling you that on the one hand, they called it in verification, voter verification, as if we had an army of people trying to vote who were not legal. And that's not the case. And there are already laws on the books for people affecting people who are not citizens if they vote. There's jail time, deportation. All of this stuff is already there. So we don't need this additional thing. These additional laws are intended to intimidate and frustrate participation because the one thing that Trump and all of his people understand is that the remedy to totalitarianism is the democratic vote of the people who go to the polls and exercise the vote. And I remember in 1995 when South Africa held its first election, and Nelson Mandela, after his 27 years in prison, was on the ballot to become president. And I remember so distinctly because San Diego County had over 1,200 voting places. That included people's garages and yards and all of that. And yet South Africa, as a country, only had 1,200 voting places in the whole country.
Mhm.
Okay, and so the whole thing was so that people stood in line because they understood the importance. When we look at the March on Washington in 63, and now on the 28th of this month, in just a few days, Reverend Al Sharpton is going to reenact that on August 28th, a march on Washington again. And I remember watching the people who came that day. And I keep saying this each week because it's so strong in my mind as I saw people come, some on a wagon, mule drawn, buck forward, some walking, some riding, some on buses. They came all kinds of ways to be there because they had experienced or what we saw in the movie Miss Jane Pittman in terms of the way people were treated, just trying to exercise the right to vote. Uh, how many jelly beans in the jar? Recite the Constitution in German. Can you speak Japanese? Whatever they could come up with in their heads, recite the whole Constitution. And some of us actually memorized the document, Dr. Thompson, so they could recite the document when the people putting them to the test probably couldn't even read the Constitution, let alone recite any part of it. And so, but we understood those around us who died for that right. We understood what Fannie Lou Hamer went through when she fought the Mississippi Democrats, because, today we have Democrats and Republicans, but going back before Lyndon Johnson, we had the Southern Dixiecrats because they were Democrats, but they were called Dixiecrats because they were as right-wing as the Republican Party, only they just wore a different hat.
So Dr. Warren, one of the things that when we begin to look at, one of the things that we begin to look at when we look at what the blockades are trying to be to voter forced to vote, have they ever come to resolve for the Voter Rights Act?
No. I'm glad you mentioned that because even though the courts twice have gutted key elements of the Voting Rights Act, Title II, and the last time, I mean, Section 3, and the first time 2. And the act was set up so that we would send people to monitor and observe so that the intimidation that we're talking about would not take place. Now, the way to overcome that is, and here's where I move into solutions, because so many times people say, well, you just keep talking about what the problem was, but what's the solution? Here's the solution. The solution is your vote. As little as it appears to be, your vote is the solution. You know, in 1966, I believe it was, in Reynolds v. Sims, the Supreme Court established a doctrine called one man, one vote, that everybody's vote was important. We got a problem right now in California. We got people spending money to help the Latino vote and the Asian vote, and they're not spending money to help the Black vote. And so we have some Black people in leadership positions complaining that we didn't get money for registration and all that. You know what? It's not about how much money they put on the table. It's about our personal commitment. And the solution, why not take the position that we have talked so much about in other terms when we said each one reach one, each one teach one? How about the voting registration? Each one register one. And the one that you register, you stay responsible for, and you get that person to the polls. That's what it takes to help make the tremendous difference. And we had cars that pick people up. We've tried here before. Black Men and Women United offered to have people get a ride if you came to a point and you needed to get to the polls. We need to get back to that. We need to get to it in such a way that we're not letting any of us say no. And if we got somebody that hasn't registered, we're going to take them to the polls anyhow and help them vote a provisional ballot, which means I don't know if I'm on the books, and maybe I'm not, but I can register today. I can vote today, and you can count my ballot. After you count all the rest, that's when you verify address on the provisional ballots, challenge ballots. Those ballots get to be important because if you went to location A to vote, they ran out of ballots. Isn't that convenient? And the only way you can vote now, you got to go all the way over to location B. Well, when you go to location B and they pull out the roll, they're not going to see your name. So you say, well, I was sent from location A and I want to vote a provisional. We call it provisional. In some states, they call it challenge. I want to vote a provisional ballot. So I get a chance to vote, put my ballot in an envelope, sign it, put my name on it, and they verify my address and whether or not I'm registered before they open the envelope to count the ballot. That's why those ballots are counted much later. And that's why on election night, you see, you wonder how, if the polls close at 8 o'clock, we have them putting early return numbers up. And you say, well, where did those numbers come from? What happens is there are two boxes on election day. There's a morning box that usually goes for those people who vote from, say, 7 until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Those ballots are collected at that point and taken to the counting place. And then there's another box that goes from 2 to 8 or 9 or whatever the closing time is. And so the first box is what's being counted, okay, during the day while people are still voting, and they can't release any figures because the figures are not ready because the polls are still open. If you release the results before the polls close, that would be considered an unfair influence. And the polling is so critical, Dr. Thompson. There was a time in many places in the country, and still are, that you can't even sell alcohol on election day. Because what used to happen is somebody would go and buy a case of fifths, or pints really, and wrap a couple of dollars around it with a rubber band and go find the people sitting out on the street doing nothing and give them a bottle with the rubber band and the $1, $2, or $5 wrapped around it and take them to the polls, and they would vote. And so that was considered an undue influence in terms of the process.
Well, one of the things that I'm always very curious of, I remember the polls being in people's garages and homes and things of that nature. And at the end of the night, they were required to take their ballot boxes to the registrar to be counted. how secure is that now? And are we still personally driving boxes to the electoral, or is there another system now?
You know, Dr. Thompson, that's a good question because that boggles my mind all the time. In other places, it's done differently. I'll give you an example. In Washington, D.C., where 60 years ago, I helped establish the precincts that they voted. I helped set up the whole thing because we got home rule then, and people were able to vote for the first time. Now, what happened was the city would send out a truck, and the truck would have someone on it as an observer. They would pick up the box that was the morning box that was sealed right there and written across the seal, and a new box was taken off, and that box was put on a truck and taken in. When I ran for office back east, because I knew the system so well, there were two things that I did. Number one, I had a whole crew at each of my 16 polling places to follow the truck from the moment it picked up the box to the time it handed it over to the people at the register of voters. A couple of times we saw a box fall off the truck, and we stopped the truck and had them pick the box up because it wasn't secure, and to make that make sense, okay? And so I that bothered me when I came to California and saw people voting in their garage. They're sealing the box because they're supposed to be sworn, and they're considered, trustworthy with it and the whole bit. And so I don't think we have as much of that anymore as we used to. But 40 years ago, it was amazing how many garage doors you saw go up and how many people were sitting around all day waiting to vote. And I think we kind of had to change all of that.
Yeah, and that was always a very big concern of mine, is that in today's modern society, how do we literally make sure that the boxes are secured and that they're in between transportation? There's a lot that can happen from point A to point B, and especially in this modern society.
Well, the second thing I said I did, because I did two things. And when I was in the Army, I was a radio person. And so I had a CB radio network established with a base station at my headquarters. And everybody who had a precinct had a person with a CB. And so we were able to track not only the boxes, we were able to track what was happening at each polling location all day long. Mm. And so we fed people in the morning and we fed them at noontime. And by evening, we were feeding people who had been opposing us, but we still fed them. And by the time the evening count came, many of them threw away the stuff for the people that they had been abandoned with and came over and joined our team, because we looked out for them and we fed them and we made provision for them. So there's a lot that goes into this. And we have not taken the voting part as seriously in California, especially here, as people have in other cities, where there was so much tied to your community participation. Like in Chicago, you couldn't live in Chicago and expect to get anything done and not know who your political boss was, your precinct leader, and not be in touch with people, because choices had consequences. Here in San Diego, there are no consequences for anything. Central Committee does what they want to. People jump ship when they get ready. Nobody has a sense of loyalty to how it works. And those who didn't want it to work in the first place benefit. Let's remember that 30 years ago, the election process in San Diego County was a sham. You could vote for a member of the city council like a primary at one point, say in May or June in the primary. But when it came to the general election, that person was on a ballot with everybody else in the county. And so what happened was that no matter who you voted for in Southeast or Barry or Logan, by the time they added La Jolla and Solano Beach and all of those other places where people didn't look like you, they could negate whatever you had and still influence the outcome of the election. And we had to go to court to get that changed so that we had district elections with those elections standing on their own without the maneuvering that came with putting a person in a district on an at-large ballot as if they were at large, just to make sure that you diluted how the people voted.
Mhm. And that's a big thing because we would have elections. I remember those times where you would have elections, and in the primaries, the people that you wanted to win won. But then when it became a citywide election, you had people that had been bought, was not a real true representation of your community, but they were elected in by a landslide because the community voted one way, but everybody around the community voted another way. They were voting in their interest. Can you go back to talking about the difference between a interest group and a pressure group?
Yes. And I thank you for the opportunity to revisit that. I said an interest group can occur when people come together. A good example now would be footnote 7 in Encanto. Those people were concerned about the housing and the fact that there was one set of footage available to the rest of the city, but they had a density factor. Theirs was 7 feet, and everywhere else it was 20. So that meant they could crowd more people. And so when those people came together, no longer was it just a discussion with the planning committee, because each community has a planning committee. But what took place was they decided they needed to do something about it. And so at the point at which they decided to organize, go to city council, demand public hearings, and speak up, now their interests became a pressure group because they were pressuring the people who were in decision making to hear them and to make changes that would be commensurate with what they wanted. Pressure groups then also lead to policy decisions being made, because when a pressure group organizes, and this is what we see with Carl DeMaio's little group, they started as an interest group wanting to restrict voter participation. They became a pressure group when they organized and got enough signatures to get their petition on the ballot as a proposition. Now they have the pressure group turning its pressure into hopefully policy. And the policy that would have come from it would have been to get the proposition passed to tighten up voting and add all of the restrictions that they were bringing. And that's where policy comes in. So policy comes from pressure groups. And so many times it's kind of subtle because interest groups can be organized so that people raise money. And many times when they get a label and they raise funds, then they hire someone to talk to elected officials. And the hiring of those folks who are known as lobbyists, then go to seek the influence and change. The perfect example of that took place downtown at 16th and Market. And I mentioned it last week, where the family that owned the gas station wanted to renovate and change the outlet and put some more lanes there, but the city code had been changed to restrict the number of driveways that they would qualify for, since the changes would not been grandfathered in like the original structure was. And so after they failed so many times to get that done over a period of years, they hired a lobbyist who was a former city council member, and that person went to all the appropriate people, and the lobbyists will often bring a draft of the language that they want to see implemented as policy change. And then when they get that on the table or get it introduced, then they count who are the people that can vote, and they go around and they start stroking them. Sometimes they bribe them, sometimes they give them a gift, sometimes they call in favors. But at the end of the day, folks get what they wanted, and it all started with the interest that they had to see a change come.
So you used the dirty word there when you said bribe or give gifts. How often do we see in politics, even today, that what we say money speaks, and money is the deal maker and the deal breaker?
Money will always speak, Dr. Thompson. You know, when I was on Capitol Hill, they would have to start Christmas around Halloween, because it took from Halloween to Christmas for everybody to get all the gifts. And sometimes it was a fur coat, sometimes it was diamonds, Sometimes it was postage stamps that could later be converted to cash without a travel record to it. Sometimes it was an automobile. Sometimes it was real estate. Sometimes it was a vacation. I mean, you got all kinds of ways. And we see that with Clarence Thomas, remember in the Supreme Court, hanging out with the billionaires, all of the gifts he and the other justice flying on people's private planes, going to their resorts. That's why we have this big fight against releasing Jeffrey Epstein stuff, because Jeffrey Epstein provided the kinds of things that people were looking for. And by being on his island, it was off of American soil. And so many things that would have been illegal here were not illegal in terms of where he bought. And that's why we see Trump trying to protect all of his friends. And there are a whole bunch of people who got caught up. So the gift giving has never stopped. I remember in 1971, Congress sought to do a reorganization and to put some restrictions on gift giving and the whole bit. They always had loopholes. To this day, we have loopholes. Okay. We got loopholes in terms of how non-persons can give money to campaigns as long as they don't have direct contact with the campaigns.
Well, Dr. Warren, you have to define, what do you mean by non-persons?
Well, under the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, a corporation becomes a person. And so when you create a political PAC, a political action committee, and you incorporate it, now that's become a person. You don't incorporate it as a nonprofit, because then you run into 501c6 and all kinds of things with the IRS and the Internal Revenue Code. But if you incorporate and come together, or make it a LLC or whatever you want to call it, and you can buy ads and you can spend money on behalf of a candidate and never talk to that candidate. And I think that's what we're going to see happen in this gubernatorial race. You're going to see white groups spending money on Steve Hilton because he becomes a great white hope against Becerra, in terms of Javier Becerra, in terms of him running as a Democrat and a Latino for governor of the state. And whites are threatened by that because the Hispanics are large in number. They are politically active now. They vote, as do the Asians. The irony is that as the Hispanics and the Asians have modeled their political operation after blacks are the ones that have become sedated and withdrawn and apathetic and stop participating as fully as they should. And so we're going to suffer as a result of that, because nobody gives anything. You know, it was once said that power gives up nothing without a struggle. It never has and it never will. They said, Frederick Douglass said it. So these are the things that we're concerned about. As you can see, there's a lot to talk about. And on September 10th, at the Voice and Viewpoint offices, I'm having a candidates forum and election night. And it's going to be open to the public to come in. And if candidates show up, we will give them a chance to speak. There will not be a debate. If you have in-person questions, we will allow that. And we're also working out the ways that we might stream it as well.
Well, Dr. Warren, before you go forth, I need you to clear up a couple of things. What's the difference between the town hall and a forum? Because I think that people need to make sure that they understand the difference.
Well, a town hall is so interesting. The Indians in the Northeast, when they looked at, they had these huge tents that they met in for tribal gatherings. I remember the people in the South Pacific, they had the same kind of structure. They had their own tents, but then they had a big tent where everybody met. And in the Northeast, in the villages and hamlets in Vermont, and New Hampshire, and all of those other places, people would come together at a central location in town when they had issues. and they would come and they would express their views on the issue. Sometimes they had a town council. Uh, Sometimes they came together without organized leadership to discuss what they might consider doing to address a problem. The big difference is that a town hall is a meeting in which the people who have come freely speak up and speak out and express their views without being tied to a party or an agenda because they have a right to speak based on citizenship, residency, and all of that. A forum is a gathering of people where people come and they sit, and you have folks on a panel or at a table or a group that they make a presentation, but the audience just basically listens. The town hall does not require what so many of us have done. You want to speak and you got to sign something on a sheet of paper and hand it up. No, town hall, you speak out and you bold enough to say what's on your mind because democracy allows you to do that. And so we're trying to get people back to the point that they do speak up. It's done in an orderly fashion. It's not done with booing and shouting people down that we disagree with. It's done allowing each the courtesy and the civility of being heard.
So this one, is it a forum or is it going to be a town hall?
This is going to be a town hall.
Okay.
Because it's going to be a situation where people can not only ask questions, but they can express their thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And if candidates are coming and given an opportunity to speak, then it's even more important that people be able to tell the candidates what they think.
Mm-hmm.
They might listen to them and say, you know what, I think you're full of whatever, and I don't even want to hear you.
Mm-hmm.
And they got a right to say that because that's freedom of speech.
And so again, this is September
the 10th.
September the 10th,
Yes.
which is a Thursday night.
I believe it is.
Yeah,
Yes.
I believe that's a Thursday night.
Yes.
And it's going to be at the San Diego
San Diego Voice and Viewpoint, 3619 College, behind the 7-Eleven. There's ample parking there. And we will also publish a link for those who would like to participate via Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
But we're hoping that people will come out physically and participate because so many of us have gotten so comfortable just sitting behind the camera that we've gotten lethargic.
Well, and the biggest thing is the energy of the room breeds a good conversation.
It does.
But also it challenges us to see the essence of why we're here.
It does. And so my final comment, Dr. Thompson, since there's always people asking, well, what about solution? The solution is getting you involved. We got voter registration cards. We are there to answer any questions. If you got a group of people and you want to come and meet with me and express your concerns because you didn't understand something, I will be happy to make time to sit with you to the extent that it's feasible and it can be done. There are no bad questions, folks. There are no dumb questions. The only bad question is the one you don't ask. And a lot of us have questions and we are afraid to speak up and we want somebody else to raise the questions. Don't do that. Be brave enough to speak and to have what's on your mind. I don't know everything, but I'm sharing with you the products of over 65 years of being involved in politics, going back to when I was 17. And so it makes a difference that I've lived through 4 or 5 presidents and campaigns from the East and the West and been involved and worked with groups. And our situation is not new. We just new to rolling up our sleeves and getting involved.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. Warren, we have reached the end of the time. When you said 4 or 5 presidents, I said, wait a minute, I've been through 4 or 5 presidents. So, I think you must have said while you was on the Hill.
Yeah, on the Hill, because if I was going to do really count them, I'd go back to Roosevelt and Eisenhower, but no, while on the Hill.
Well, with that being said, this is For the Desk of the Editor with Dr. John Warren. We will be back here, continuing to talk about the propositions and the things that are impacting our city, our state, and our nation. Please tune in next week, same time, same spot, right here on GOD Radio 1.
And if you have a question, give it to us, and we'll be able to answer and discuss it then.
Have a good evening.